You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way using food starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Ailleen Birkitt on the show today. Ailleen, welcome to the Nutrition Experts.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be here today.
I'm excited, too, to have you on the show and share your expertise with my tribe. Let's start by letting you tell my listeners a little more about you and what you do.
Oh, sure. I'm a registered dietitian and licensed dietitian currently in the state of Rhode Island, where I have my own private practice called You LLC. I did become a registered dietitian in 2002, opened up my own private practice in New Jersey, in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, in March of 2009. I was there until November of 2018, where we had a family move for my husband's job relocation, and I'm now in Rhode Island. And I have an office in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, where I see a bunch of different patients, but I do specialize in eating disorders. I'll see people with diabetes, prediabetes, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, weight management, and like I said, all the picky eating, and also the whole span of eating disorders.
You mentioned that you specialize in eating disorders. Have you worked a lot with people with eating disorders?
Yes, I have. I worked as a per diem dietitian at Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Hospital in Somerville, New Jersey, which is an excellent program for people with eating disorders. And there they have inpatients, outpatient. So there's a partial hospitalization program and an IOP. So I have seen the whole realm of eating disorders, starting from inpatient. And the cool thing about that program is that you do get to see people progress. It's the same therapist, same dietitian, psychiatrist, every step of the program.
What is your experience working with young adults? Because I guess I associate eating disorders with younger people and body image.
A lot of people think that it is only something that afflicts adolescents, but also we did see people that were much older, definitely more prevalent with adolescents. I'd say like 1% are female adolescents suffer from this, but honestly, like 30 million people suffer from anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. So like kind of all different lifespans. Another interesting thing too is there are males that have eating disorders, and that doesn't always get noticed or mentioned a lot. It does typically get to be considered like an adolescent female disease.
So what's your experience kind of with young adults and how they view body image and how it gets distorted, I guess, in an eating disorder?
What I find a lot with young adults is they are, like a lot of us, very prone to the images with social media. And in today's day and age, they're on all sorts of social media all the time, seeing a lot of images and other people, just saying this is the way you're supposed to look. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there, too, about how to get there. Mm-hmm. So, and I say misinformation because a lot of it is not healthy. And so a lot of times I feel like they're kind of seeing maybe not the right things. I try to work with them. And I always, with somebody with an eating disorder, should also be working with a therapist in conjunction for treatment. And, we work together to try to make sure that they are kind of staying away from some of that negative information and kind of going to more body positive information. And I do find a lot of times that adolescents will be who come in and say that, they're comparing themselves to others a lot. It seems to be a common thing.
But is it in an eating disorder, they kind of have a different, I don't know, is it called dysmorphia? Like they don't see themselves the same way in the mirror that we see them as a physical person. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. That is very common where they will, see something completely different than in themselves than what we see. So there's a lot of tactics we can use. Just really trying to work with them on kind of self-worth, giving them affirmations to kind of start to feel better about their body. Some things that have been done are a lot of things happen when they look in the mirror too. Come to find where sometimes a recommendation is just put some Post-it notes on the mirror saying you're awesome, you rock. You're not being judged by just what they see in the mirror. We also try to educate them that there is this kind of like an eating disorder voice. A lot of people with eating disorders know it as ED. Sometimes we give it a name, which seems to help to say, well, if Ed's saying that you look this certain way in the mirror, just talk back to Ed. And that can help sometimes too, kind of talking back to that negative voice.
So the voice you're talking about is basically the voice that's saying you're fat, your hips are too big, you're not whatever else it would say. So when they hear those messages, you encourage them to just talk back. And what kind of things would they say back to that voice? Just that's not true, or?
Yeah. Something like, be quiet. They can yell at it if they want, whatever works for the person. Another cool thing sometimes they can do is take an index card and say, well, what are all these thoughts that come up in your head? And they'll write it down. And I'll say, take on the back of it, write a better response. Like, for instance, you're fat and ugly. The other side will say, no, you're beautiful the way you are. It's just something to, because you do over time can train the brain to start to talk back. It's work. It's definitely a lot of work, and it does take a lot of time. And that's why they should also be working with a therapist on some of these issues.
Yeah, I had a guest recently we were talking about brain and changing those thoughts and those processes and how reality, yes, but your brain, you do have these inner commentary going on. So identifying that is important, whether you have an eating disorder or not. If you have some sort of negative inner voice, it's going to hold you back a little, I would think. So can we talk a little bit about since I'm sure you work a lot with people with eating disorders on healthy body image versus an unhealthy one. Can you talk about what is the difference?
There's something called health at every size. It's kind of a movement going on right now. It's kind of accepting where you are right now, which is extremely hard to do, versus an unhealthy body image is that really giving into that inner voice. You're fat, you're ugly, you shouldn't eat. I mean, it's amazing the things that this voice will say. It's just unfortunate. So that try to tell people that that these voices or these thoughts are not truths seems to be kind of, sometimes little phrases can really help people. And that's a big one that I like, that not every thought that goes through your head is a truth.
Just like everything on the internet's not true, right?
Right. Right. And sometimes people will just, say, I feel bloated today, so I must be fat. And I'll say, wait a second, do you hear what you just said? I feel. Is that truth? You know what I mean? So kind of working a lot with that. And a lot of, things, just telling them too about the media, how altered, it's so amazing how altered so many of the images are to look a certain way.
What was kind of an eye-opener to me, I guess, is when we went out to Vegas one time, and they have the costumes for the performers and stuff, or even in a Hard Rock Cafe, they have the costumes that these performers wear, and they're so small, like they're size 4, size 2, whatever. But looking at them on TV or whatever, I wouldn't necessarily think they were that small, but you're right, kind of the visually what you see and having that process, it just made me realize that the size that I thought they were, that they may be shorter than I thought they were, they may be taller than I thought they were, but just kind of that reality of, oh, wow, that's actually the costume that they wore. So that's just, it just kind of reminds me a little bit of what you were just saying.
I think it was Marilyn Monroe was a size 10, and that was acceptable at the time. And just how things have changed over the years, where with, people just, in the media just they want you to get smaller and smaller. It's just not right. And I think now, I feel like things are changing a lot. I feel like some people are kind of, calling that out. I know there's trying to think of it, which there's a magazine that just kind of said they're not going to alter all the images anymore. It was a women's magazine. I don't want to say the wrong one. I can't think of which one it is. But so certain things are beginning to happen. I think, people are starting to call it out a little bit more. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, and then on the opposite side, you have all these Instagram filters and Waves apps that can shrink your waist and make your eyes look bigger and your head kind of rearranged. And that altered image that then is presented as actual. I can see how it can mess with your mind a little bit. What types of things do you use with your clients to implement the health at every size mentality?
I always tell people not to. I don't think people should be weighing themselves, because that instantly makes people not happy about their size, like right away. I mean, you wake up and you get on the scale. It's like, I'll just say it's just a number, but what a downer! Like because of that one thing, like the whole day is shot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if I do need to weigh somebody, I try to focus on weight, except if somebody had been suffering with anorexia nervosa, they're in outpatient treatment, they really need to be monitored. Of course, I'm going to need to see what their weight is fairly frequently, but I'll do it's a blind weight, like they will turn the other way and they won't see it. So I try to keep the focus just in general off of the number on the scale. And when people come in, we just talk about things, what can just make you feel better? How are you eating right now? I'll kind of have them give me like a dietary recall and just tell me what they had to eat yesterday or what's a typical day. And then I try to just kind of see where there might be gaps and talk about how to eat. And then, with a focus on feeling better. And if anybody exercises, is it just because, I got to exercise, I got to burn, or is, trying to focus on something enjoyable for the body? I think those are all kind of things that go along with the health at every size.
So back to like eating disorders, how common are they? I know you said 1% of females. Did you mention in an age range, or?
That was adolescents.
Okay. Is there a group that is more inclined to that diagnosis outside of teenage girls or women, young women?
0.5 to 3.7% of women suffer from eating disorders. There are 30 million people, which is a huge number, that suffer from anorexia nervosa, bulimia, or binge eating disorder. So I think that's like pretty alarming number. And that's just the reported numbers that we know about. You know what I mean? There's some that probably aren't even, reported in that.
So can you talk about what each of those is, anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder?
Sure. Now, there's a whole bunch of criteria for each one, but the anorexia nervosa is people are restricting, and they're usually end up being very underweight. They're way below their ideal body weight. So kind of have to work a lot with them on very slowly at first reincorporating food. For it to really be a binge eating disorder, it's got to be a unusually large amount of the food item that somebody eats, like more than just a normal serving. And then there's a lot of guilt after eating that. So 3.5% are women that have this, and 2% are men. So that is one of the higher eating disorders that men would be the binge eating disorder. It's much, fairly more common in men than some of the other eating disorders.
So they don't necessarily, with the binge eating, they don't necessarily do anything to throw up or over-exercise or anything. It's more just the eating and the feeling the guilty.
Right, for the criteria. Now, it's the bulimia where there's a purging aspect. So there's the binge, the binge eating, and then also the purging or vomiting. Sometimes purging, we always assume it means vomiting, but sometimes it can mean exercising to compensate for calories eaten.
All of this kind of, talking about health at every size and body image, I know that there may be 30 million people out there with eating disorders, but there's a whole lot more people who are dieting, so to speak, or, doing this where they eat right for a little while and then they go back to a normal, or go back to eating carbs or whatever happens. So what part of the diet culture is troubling for you as a dietitian?
The thing is, not just the diet culture too, just the beauty products culture. People are, I feel like they're always trying to make us feel like something's wrong, because otherwise how would they make money? I think it's huge for people to just gain an awareness of this, because it's been around for so long, and I think a lot of us just take it for granted that it's there. But if you really stop and think, like when you turn on the TV and there's a commercial, a lot of infomercials about, oh, there's something wrong with your face, so you need this product. Well, the same thing happens with food and dieting. Supplement industry is huge. I mean, if you take this, you're going to perform better. They're always trying to make us feel bad with what we have, rather than, it wouldn't make money if everybody was just kind of celebrating how we are as we are. But it's just so rampant. It's everywhere. You can't go, the grocery store aisle, you're looking at a magazine, the captions, the headlines, this diet, that diet, anti-aging, we can't even, it's not even okay to age,
Yeah, it's not okay to age and get wrinkles. You got to start using vitamin C and vitamin A on your face. And
Right. So it's just, I think just really having that awareness that a lot of, most of it is really a money-making thing. And, if we can just be a little bit more aware that that's what's going on, I think it would help. I guess it doesn't sell the cover to say, celebrate your aging naturally and don't go on a diet, right?
Obviously, there are health problems with being overweight and stuff. So yes, there may be a little bit, but I understand what you're saying about, people who are 20 pounds overweight. They're giving this impression that you need to still just lose this weight to be this perfect size. Or like you said, when you're in your 40s, you need to start using anti-aging cream so you don't look like you're 60 when you're 60 with wrinkles. So,
right.
I guess I never really thought much about it, but that is the way they sell that something's wrong with you, so you need to change. So how do you combat that in your clients, or even just in regular people? How do you combat that besides just being aware of it?
Well, I do have like a little checklist. Like I'm a big handouts person all the time. So when I see people in my office, I'm always like, here's a handout about that, because I think it really helps, like little reminders. I do have a thing to kind of decipher like what's junk media, it can be called. And, does it sound too good to be true? Is it telling you have to have this product and everything will be better? Are there a lot of should or shouldn'ts? Those are big things. So just so that when somebody has that and they see things, they can maybe look at that paper and just say, oh, wait, this person, I don't even know who they are. And they're saying I should go on this diet and I should only eat carrots, or I shouldn't eat carrots. There's all sorts of things out there.
A lot of this diet culture is promoting fad diets, or what dietitians call fad diets. Eat, like you said, eat only carrots, or eat only cabbage soup, or do these certain things. Are there any good things about fad diets?
I don't think there are any good things about fad diets. I believe more in working with someone to eat in a way that they can do for their lifestyle. The thing with the fad diets is, yes, a lot of people will lose weight in 6 months. And sometimes it's rapid. Some of it's just water weight. But as far as research and things, there's not a lot of research saying beyond that 6 months that this weight stays off. In most cases, people gain it back and then even gain back more. When you have these fad diets, usually there's something that's restricted. For instance, a big one today is carbs. Okay, so yes, if you cut things out, the weight does go down. But the problem with the fad diets is people are going to go off them probably. They're not sustainable. And then when you go off it, it's like, oh my gosh, I haven't had carbs in so long. And then next thing you know, these things that were forbidden are suddenly very appealing. And then there comes the weight gain. I believe more in sustainable eating and just kind of showing people what does a healthy plate look like? What should be on your plate for meals? In about 3 to 4 hours after your meal, it's a good idea to have a snack. So just ways to eat that they can take with them through their lifetime. It's not just a quickly come lose weight and then you're on your way.
I think sometimes that people don't understand it's not just weight loss. There are health components to carbs, fiber, vitamins, especially in whole grains. And sometimes missing out on those things, even though we may take a supplement to replace it, it's just not the same as the whole food is. And allowing that may have consequences later. So, and the yo-yo thing too, it's just really hard on your body.
Just to kind of talk about that a little more, there are certain things they have the diet name, but they're not really a fad diet. There's been a lot of research showing that the Mediterranean, they say diet, but I still think of it as a way, I'd rather call it Mediterranean way of eating. I like that term better. Focusing on, a lot of fish and olive oil and nuts and whole grains, is a really, there's research. That's a great way for heart health to eat. And there's another thing called the DASH diet, which is for lowering blood pressure. It's dietary approaches to stop hypertension, which focuses a lot on lots of fruits and vegetables and then lower sodium. And that has been shown to reduce blood pressure and improve heart health in some people. But those are not really a diet in the sense that they're excluding, you can never have this, you can never have that. They're just kind of incorporating healthy things in the eating.
So thinking about overall just the diet culture, eating disorders, that type of stuff, what's the solution to improving how we eat?
Making sure you have all the components in a meal, some carbohydrates, some protein, some fat, fruits, vegetables, dairy. Eating every 3 to 4 hours is really important so that you never go too long. When you go too long without eating, then you end up ravenous and probably not eating like a regular portion size that you would want. And then sometimes that creates the whole guilt cycle or binge cycle. So there's a whole lot to that. So it's really regular eating, incorporating these components that I talked about, 3 meals a day plus 1 to 2 snacks a day.
We all know kind of that's the right thing to do. And I think even the word is out in the media as well. It's just not a fast solution. It's over time. So why aren't people doing, the eating that right way?
Kind of like what you just said, there's all these what seem to be fast solutions that keep coming out. And I think people just kind of grab onto that because, a lot of times I think it's because maybe the person telling it looks so great and, I did this, look at me. And so I think a lot of it is media perpetuated. If more people could focus, I like to teach a lot about intuitive and mindful eating, which is kind of eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. We get really away from that with all the diets. It takes us away from our natural hunger and fullness, and then we're following kind of this other plan. So trying to get back in touch with that and then really paying attention to what and when we're eating, I think is huge.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
I just think a lot of the stuff we're told to do, might not be, or to follow might not be working. And I think focusing on some of these other things, I see it's just tremendous. And it gets people more in touch with their body and more kind of at peace with food.
This morning at breakfast, my daughter, she ate we had some sausage and she had some applesauce, and she ate about half her applesauce, and then she said, okay, she ate her sausage and then the applesauce, and she said, I'm done. And so my son says, if that was ice cream, would you finish it? He said, do you have like 2 stomachs, like a regular stomach and then an ice cream stomach? And she said, no, I wouldn't. And the truth is that she does, whenever we have like ice cream, she gets a smaller bowl. She doesn't eat as much, just, not out of any sort of desire to lose weight, but more of a desire to just eat what she has in her bowl and not throw it away. But I said, okay, fine. You don't have to eat the rest of your applesauce if you're, full, you're not hungry. We'll stick it in the fridge. You can have it for a snack later, whatever. That just what you were talking about just reminds me that it starts at a young age, that message that I got the message when I was growing up that I needed to clean off my plate because there wasn't that much food. We were low income and we didn't have a lot of money. And so if you didn't eat all your food, you may not get food later. So it's a little different for my kids because it's always been like not about you have to clean your plate. It's about don't come back 5 minutes later looking for the Cheetos, type thing. So eating a little healthier, but listening to the messages your body gives you. How would you recommend like dietitians when they're counseling their patients or people who are listening to this podcast, how could they implement kind of what we talked about today as far as eating healthier, diet culture, all that type of stuff?
Okay, I think by educating, their patients on some of the things I talked about where, look at the message, who's saying it, where's it coming from, what is their degree, is it a dietitian or, because there could be MSRD, which is a dietitian with a master's, that RD there would be a great source for nutrition information, checking where they're finding their information. A lot of people kind of come in and say, oh, I found this out on the web. Should I be doing it? Well, where did you find it out? Is it a reputable source of information? So kind of deciphering that. And then also, I think working with people to get in touch with their more mindful eating. Like, well, are you paying attention to when you're eating? What times of day are you eating? Certain things like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when I saw a lot of outpatients, I would always pay attention in the supermarket to what the fad diets were that were on the magazines, just because I knew I was going to get asked about them. So kind of knowing a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Just kind of having that knowledge. Also, one other thing I want to bring up is with the, educating patients for dietitians out there with the fad diets and things, just recognizing that it's a fad diet if there's a list of good foods and bad foods. Like I said, the shoulds and shouldn'ts. Just really being aware of that, because I believe it's very important to teach patients that all foods fit. And you hear that a lot from dietitians, but I do think it's really important, because once you label it as bad, there comes the guilt and there comes the food that you want to eat. Kind of like what you were just saying with your daughter, you're offering, like in this like small portion size bowl, you're offering the ice cream. These things are around. They're not like completely prohibited. I think it's important to teach people to learn to work with all, the things that are out there, and how do you incorporate them into your daily eating.
So are there any signs for a parent if they have a teenage boy or girl, but like you mentioned, it's more common in teenage girls, that they might notice in their daughters or sons that might trigger them to think that they're starting to have some of these issues with food?
Yeah, certainly, of course, if they notice any weight loss, hopefully they're going to their physicians, for checkups. Sometimes if you find like hidden food around, like in the bedroom, that, that's another kind of thing just to be aware of. The problem is too, though, sometimes these are hidden so well, it's hard to know. I think just having a dialogue too with the kids, keep checking in on them and having family dinners and talking together is going to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I had a cousin when I was growing up that had anorexia, and by the time it was clear to everybody in the family that she had it was pretty significant. But it's those signs like the good foods, bad foods, like I can't eat certain things, or being, like you said, a picky eater, but there's something between a picky eater and like, I want to eat it, but I can't eat it.
Sometimes when someone starts to restrict and then restricts meat, it can be a sign. And it is something that we, as dietitians who focus on eating disorders, look out for. We ask why. Well, is it for ethical reasons? Or sometimes it is eating disorder, just saying, hey, here's another thing that you can restrict to help you lose weight. I'm not saying that is a weight loss mechanism. It's not, but that's sometimes what the eating disorder mind will think. But when you start to see someone who all of a sudden starts to avoid a lot of foods gradually, that's another sign of a potential eating disorder. And like we were talking about, not someone who's always been picky. There is a difference where you start to see these changes where they were eating that, always enjoyed it, and suddenly, no, I don't want that. You got to kind of find out. And I'd say referring them to a therapist and a dietitian are, excellent ways to work on those issues.
Yeah. So speaking of foods, I always ask my guests, what is your favorite food? So tell us what your favorite food is.
It's definitely eggplant parmesan.
Oh, really?
Over pasta. Yes.
So I was looking at some eggplant parmesan recipes the other day, and they mentioned slicing up the eggplant and then salting it to get like the extra moisture out. Is that something that you do, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I try to slice it really thin and get the moisture out. Yep.
Yeah, so it doesn't. So, okay.
But typically, if I go to an Italian restaurant, if that's on the menu, that's what I'm getting.
Ailleen, I've loved talking to you today. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure having you on the show. I know my listeners learned a lot about just diet culture, eating disorders. And if listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I have a website. It's www.nutrition and then the number 4 LLC.com. I'm also on Facebook. Same thing, Nutrition with the 4, You LLC. And I'm also on Instagram as Nutrition for You LLC. So there are lots of ways. And I encourage you to check it out.
Well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.